is on. The campaign for the UNC to form the next government is on. Or will the campaign by the other political parties be enough to outdo the two main political parties? Your vote will decide. Campaign 2020, August 10th on I-95.5 FM, the most influential name in politics.
Do you know there exists a lawful body to represent estate police officers? Are you tired and fed up of poor working conditions, disrespect and abuse by employees? Then join the Estate Police Association and our program, The EPA Speaks, breaking chains, raising barriers.
The EPA Speaks, a program from the Estate Police Association, Mondays at 2 p.m.
on I-95.5 FM, the most influential name in radio.
The EPA Speaks. Brought to you by Millennium Insurance Brokers.
In a world with many choices, the only choice for news is I-95.5 FM Talk.
And we are not getting the people in authority who should be able to step forward and say, okay, we will suspend the officers until pending an inquiry. All we are getting is good political rhetoric and jargon to turn back the blame on those of us who try to exercise the only right we have to sensitize the public with protest.
Every effort would be made to gather every sliver and iota of evidence through the system to ensure that evidence would lead to justice, and justice will eschew revenge. Today is not a good day, but let us hope that as we bury the dead, that we will resolve to make tomorrow a better day, not only for ourselves, but for the people who live in communities like these.
News Center 5. News Center 5. On air and everywhere. I-95.5 FM, the most influential name in news. Every day, something new is happening around the world. I-95.5 explains what is going on. We analyze the facts to tell you the truth. We report all sides so you can better understand what really happened. We often take sides on the major issues of politics and society, with a goal in moving policies and events in what we think is the best direction for the country. Informative. Innovative. Intriguing. I-95.5 FM, the most influential name in radio.
Hello world. This is www.i95.5fm.com, Trinidad.
As we resume our look back at the events of April 1970, we hear from the leaders of the Black Power movement, sharing another perspective on the mutiny at Tetron.
The action they took prevented unnecessary bloodshed because it would have ended up with soldier versus police.
And creating unity between Africans and Indians.
Black Power came to represent a threat to some leaders in the community who wanted to maintain the separation because they realized that this was the thing that could upset his power base in the Indian community.
There were also the journalists who covered the chaos in Port of Spain.
I saw a young man lying on a cover table and he had a peculiar look on his face. So I went up and asked, he said, "You okay? How are things? You saw anything happening here?" And there was no movement. I was actually talking to a corpse.
And the massive march to Caroni.
And everybody stopped. Nobody said a word. I think time stood still. I think nature stood still. There was maybe a mild breeze just to act as a theater. And as Badis reached the gate, he stuck his right hand up in the air and he shouted, "Power to the people."
You don't want to miss Part 10 of the groundbreaking 1970 series, only on Eye on Dependency, reality radio at its best, this Sunday from 6:15 p.m. on I-95.5 FM and live on the Eye on Dependency Facebook page. Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. Tell someone.
This is Eye on Dependency with Garth and Natasha. Sundays at 6:15 p.m. on the most influential name in radio, I-95.5 FM.
In March 1970, went from university, march all over town in a silent song. But when they meet our business, they standing face to face. Then I know the silent song had a chorus in tongue. With their right hand in the air like a flower, and any man shouting power, power, power. With their right hand in the air like a tower, and any man shouting power, power, power. The leader constructor told me no surrender. Macaroni, a peaceful journey. But when they meet the big man shouting for a tone, and he did already know how the chorus go. It's the right hand in the air like a flower, and every man shouting power, power, power. With the right hand in the air like a flower, and every man shouting power, power, power. The police on duty with humanity, they spray a little gas and kept watching past. But when a fella get it wrong, I start to interfere. Is then the police get vexed and make the arrest. Put the baton in the air like a tower, and say I arrest you with power, power, power. With the baton in the air like a tower.
I arrest you for power, power, power. Trinidad soon adopted all the outward signs of black power. The haircuts, the salute, the language, but without the same motivating force as that movement had in the US. That's the United States of America. The idea of black power in Trinidad was, according to Hilton Edwards, ridiculous in the sense that there was a black prime minister, a predominantly black cabinet, a black chief justice, and a black commander of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force and commissioner of police. The raised fist salute and the black power movement would therefore basically revolt against the haves by the have-nots, backed by the intellectuals who were Afro-oriented and anti-Afro-Saxon, and also by a growing desire to remove the father figure of independence, namely Dr. Eric Williams. And this is a piece taken from the book Lengthening Shadows, The Birth and Revolt of the Trinidad Army by S. Hilton Edwards. Thank you, Andy, for this, and we say good evening, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to our Independency, right here on I-95.5 FM and on our Facebook page, I on Dependency. Good evening, Natasha.
Good evening, Garth. Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago. I know that a lot of people have been eagerly anticipating this program because we are diverting a bit from our previous moorings in terms of speaking with military personnel and paramilitary personnel. Now we're hearing directly from leaders of the Black Power movement and from the journalists that covered the activities of 1970.
Correct, and we're going to hear from some storytellers this evening. Mm-hmm. And they can actually put you in that space and time where they were. So you're going to hear from Clive Nunez, Khafra Kambon. Brother Nunez and Brother Kambon will give their take on what the Black Power movement was all about, how it started.
And what they experienced as well.
And then we will hear from another storyteller, Alfred Aguiton, who was a journalist on the ground at that time. Very, very interesting. And of course, Mr. Jones P. Madeira. You're going to be hearing from these gentlemen this evening. And we don't have a moment to spare because they went into depth, and we have some pictures to show you as well. And what you're going to see, that famous banner, Indians and Africans Unite. Now, I just read a piece there, very interesting. It almost as if you're taking that and placing it in today's history, because we do have a black Chief Justice, a black Prime Minister, black Commissioner of Police, black, you name it. It's strange, a black President, and but of course the march now was for something else. So you're going to see pictures of the march for Caroni, of course pictures of the gentlemen contributing this evening. Badis Maharaj, you'll hear about Badis Maharaj, who I call Badis, because he was really a Badis back in the day. And pictures on the Black Power meeting and the Black Power demonstration. Now, keep in mind, people, we're coming to the end of this lollipop. It was a long one, but we learned a lot. Very interesting. Next week we're going to have that parade, and we'll tell you all about that. And then we wait on Andrea Jacobs, and then we're going to hear from them in a separate broadcast. Clem Haynes and Malcolm Cunahan, these are the National Union of Freedom Fighters. So it's going to be a really interesting evening, and we're going to get right into. We say hello to all of you joining us on Facebook, and remember,
please like and share this live with anyone you think will be interested.
Yes, and thank you, Anna, listening from Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you, Anthony Telesford from Grenada, Alison Salandi, and the usual crew who will join us on a Sunday. Thank you for being with us. Bianca, thank you very much. So, who are we going to hear from first, Natasha? Clive Nunez.
Yep, let's take him in.
And we're going to be, when we take a break, the ads that you would normally hear on radio, you're going to be seeing them now on Facebook. So you'll have to log on to Facebook for that. And I want to say to the adults, get accustomed to this, because when we prepare for back to school, we're going to be doing another presentation on drugs that are available to your children when they go out. And we want you to see firsthand for yourself. So if you see it at home, and you will sit with your child and look at it. We're doing this in conjunction with the Principals Association, Primary School Principals Association, NALIS, and others. We'll tell you about it as we get closer to school reopening. All right, so without further ado, Natasha has done a great job once again on editing this content, and let's go to Clive Nunez. Over to you, Natasha. You could introduce Clive.
Sure. Clive Nunez talks about his experience being arrested on the day that the state of emergency was called, the 21st of April 1970, and his experience was quite interesting. So take it away.
Named Clive Nunez, one of the leaders of the 1970 Black Power movement, also a retired trade unionist, Transport and Industrial Workers Union, and NUJ. The weekend before, we were in Tobago. We were having a massive meeting in Scarborough by a grocery, and we had the feeling that the government is going to declare a state of emergency because the reactionary elements in the trade union movement headed by Clive Spencer had gone to Dr. Williams, people like Nathaniel Critchlow and so on, and told the Prime Minister that if he don't intervene, they will join the Black Power movement. So we knew that was coming. But this also indicated, after the failure of the march through Caroni to Cuba, when we failed to stop it, we knew that Badis also said to Dr. Williams that if you're not intervening in this, I will join the Black Power movement. Because what happened, the Governor General at that time was Sir Solomon Hochoy. And Dr. Williams wanted Solomon Hochoy to declare the state of emergency, and he said he not going to declare it. So the next thing, Hochoy went on leave or sent on leave, whatever it was. And Arthur McShine, a black judge, African, who believes he's an Englishman, speaks like an Englishman. So I'm mimicking on the mic how he will declare the state of emergency. So we came back. The morning about 4 o'clock, I was living at 42 East Street, Barataria. You heard some vehicle movements. So when I looked, I saw 4 squad cars, and policemen came up. Most of them had what looked like a 45 revolver. One went under a mango tree, one went over the land. So it was clear that they came for me. But I know where I live. I know my terrain. So I got out of there. But I can see all of them. They knocked on the door, they went into the house. They asked my mother-in-law for me. She said, I'm not there. And they pushed the door and they went into all the bedrooms and so on. And raised up all the blanket, all kind of thing. My last child was just 1 month old. She was born on the morning of the March, the 12th of March, 1970. And they're looking all in the bassinet and so on. Then they left. It was clear to me that they were now going to go up to Sao, where my father lived. So I called my father and told him, they came for me, but they're coming up by you now. So my father now opened up all the wardrobe, the cupboards, everything, waiting for them. And they came. But the man who was in charge, I can't remember his name now, but he and my father had sat the exam to get into the police service, in which he went, but my father declined. He said, Mr. Nunez, yeah. He said, Clive Nunez is your son? He said, yes. He said, well, we come for him. My father said, he don't live here, but I have everything open for you all to see. And then he said, oh, Mr. Nunez, no, Roddy boy, I'm gone. And they went. I immediately called Lennox Spear, and I told him what the situation was. He said, all right, he will call Alan Alexander, and Alan Alexander will pick me up in Barataria and take me to headquarters. So Alan passed. We went down to headquarters. When we spoke to the receptionist there, he said he knew nothing about I coming there. And we began to walk out of headquarters. And then he heard 2 other men from CID clapping. They were in plain clothes and tell us to stop there. So we stopped at the step. And they came and they said, all right, both of you come in. Took us into an old room in headquarters there. It had benches and so on, like they used to stack things in there. And then the police told me to go behind the 3rd bench and stand up. So Alan Alexander says, well, why? What do you want him for? Are there charges? What is going on? And they're not answering him, and he asked them about 3 times. And then the police said, Mr. Alan Alexander, if you continue asking questions, I'll put you behind the 3rd bench. And Alan took off. Eventually, Burroughs came, and he had this weapon. And he was telling some of the policemen who was there. There was one who was very hostile. And Burroughs turned to him and said, I am leaving Clive Nunez here. And I don't want anybody to do anything with him. He said, I am leaving now. Well, I know he's leaving with them now. I said, Randy, you shouldn't talk to the police like that. I told him that. He said, Nunez, you don't know that. I said, I know that. I know some of them. And he left. And from the reports we got, he went straight up to NJAC's headquarters in Waterman Road in Belmont. Sometime later, they took us down to Stovall's. Well, we didn't know where we were going. And while we were on the way, which after we understand is headquarters, the Coast Guard, there was this red touring, how would I call it, Morris Minor, driven by Julian Spencer. And one of his hands had something like a bandage. And he was speeding going down in opposite direction to us. And we went in. I had to go in last. We had to climb up some steps and go up to an office there. So the others went, Kambon, and a number of people. And when I went up last, there were 2 soldiers or Coast Guard. As I reached up to the top step, they had 3 rifles with bayonets. And they just put it across my face like an X and say, not you. So I stood up. And then 2 other uniformed persons come and tell me, follow them. And I must walk in front. And I walk in front, went down east of the jetty, where there was one of the ships there called on Bay. And they make me climb over a seawall, and they put me into a little changing hut. They put the lock on it, but they didn't catch the lock. But one of the persons, I knew him. He was from San Fernando. So while I was in there, I was talking with him and so on. And they knew nothing. Then when I peeped through the door, through the crease, I saw Kambon and they walking on the jetty, and they went into the Holland Bay. They went before me. I had to climb over the seawall again. And when I reached onto the deck, there was Laurie Goldstraw, who I knew because I knew him and going to police and so on. He was the deputy, I think, to Bloom. And he shouted out, put Nunez behind the big gun. That's the buffer. So I was put there, and there were 2 or 3 special branch police that I knew also. Well, I heard some shots. So I was looking around. When I looked, I saw 3 females, their hands up in the air, walking along the shoreline. But they don't have no beach there. And I saw some uniformed persons behind them. After that, I realized the boat is now leaving. As the boat was leaving, because I'm on deck, I am seeing a little dingy coming with a man with a helmet, with pieces of bush all on top of the helmet, and they came alongside. Then I heard someone call him Stanley Johnson, and he asking, Rostro, Laurie, what's happening? Whatever they talk and so on. Eventually, the dingy turned away, and we came on that. Not knowing where we were. When we arrived, it was Nelson Island. And there was another boat because that ship was way above the jetty. So you couldn't come off from the ship onto the jetty. So that there was Richard Kelshall, and he was standing up on here. And we now had to go down onto a smaller launch and then get onto the jetty. So Richard telling us, jump down. And we said, but look at this thing there. He said, well, you could tell some of you jumped there and dead. It's better for we. He said that. Well, then it came closer, and then we came down. And then we took onto Nelson Island and up where there was what turned out to be a dormitory. And I remember Anthony Franklin, and I saw him there. And there was a mat on the floor with a bag, like a sugar bag, and with chalk mark, welcome. So we went in there. We have no clothes except what we had on. And then all during the day, there were more and more coming in. Because there's no windows, no doors, we were told we cannot come out the building. And I remember seeing Abrams, and then there were 2 others in short pants. So eventually, I get to know one was Thomas and one was Hercules. And then there were complaints also by some Coast Guard. They had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. They can't make no coffee. So you're hearing all those kinds of things and so on. And for 1 week, we couldn't wait in the same clothes. So I think it was the Saturday. It was taking us in batches down close to the jetty. We have a little beach area, more gravel and so on that beach. So we went in there and bathing. And then there was a pirogue that was coming. Now, there was a Coast Guard. He was on a big stone, and he had this weapon on the tripod. And I know that as this pirogue was coming, they were making signs and telling them, go back, turn back. But then it continued to come. And the next thing we knew was shots were fired over our heads. And we say, take us back inside. So we went back inside. One of the days we saw some battleships. The one was written in Spanish, right? Well, we didn't see them come ashore. We just saw them there, and then eventually they turned and went back. But the other day, there saw some other bigger battleships. And as they were coming closer, you see the American flag. But it didn't come close. So we were there, we talking and so on, getting to know some of the Coast Guard people and so on. Because we are about educating people, telling what this thing is about, what is the movement, all that kind of thing. On the Sunday, about 2 o'clock, we saw some policemen came in plain clothes. They had SMGs, and they come out with a list, and they called out 9 of us, because Makandal came a few days later and tell us, get ready to go in a launch. One of the police I knew well, Regis, so call him Scorpion, but they handcuffed us by 2s. So I was handcuffed to Wayne Davis, who used to work Wassa. So the 9 of us, we are there sitting on the floor. And when we're leaving now, a little while later, rain started to drizzle. And we started to get wet and so on. And Regis had this SMG pointed straight to my face. And he grinding up and so on. The next thing I know, some birds flying. Regis just take his gun and shoot across to the bird. And then he bring it back down, straight by my face, even closer. So there's some heat there, so of course I'd perspire and so on. And then I look at him and tell him, I say, you wish you get an order inside there to pull the trigger. He said nothing. None of the policemen spoke. When we came down onto the port, there was Edgar Wilson. I think he was an inspector. And we say, well, where are we going? Wilson said, well, we're taking all your the new government. And he laughing. And they took us up to the Royal Jail. When we reached up at the Royal Jail, we were each handed charges of sedition. 9 of us. The police was there handing out these sedition charges and so on. And we went past the remand yard and we went to the condemned section with each of us in a cell. We challenged our arrest and imprisonment. A few of us, George Weeks, Matanda, Kambon, and the matter went to the court. The judge was Justice Hassan Ali. When we saw what our lawyers were doing, we realized they citing law, we citing politics. And we just dislodged our lawyers and we did our case ourselves. And we were putting on trial Texaco and Pt10 and the multinational W.R. Grace. We were putting them on trial. And eventually, Hassan Ali ruled that we were illegally arrested because the state of emergency was not yet declared. So we won the matter, but they took us back to the Royal Jail because our clothes was there and so on. And when we went in and we took up our clothes and we came out, we met more police in the public area and they now hand us a correct detention order. So 9 of us were charged for sedition. And I want to make this point. The bad British colonials in their whole history in Trinidad only charged 2 persons for sedition. Uriah Buzz Butler and Elmer Francois. Elmer Francois won her matter and Butler years later won his matter. There's the famous judgment Butler versus the King, but he had already spent 2 years on Nelson Island. And then when the war broke, he was again arrested and put from 39 to the end of World War II. They began the sedition trials. And do you know who was the prosecutor? Anthony Carmona. This is our history. I knew Rex LaSalle because his father was a traffic manager in the Trinidad Government Railway, where I worked. But I knew Raf before, and a number of other soldiers I knew, because I knew a lot of soldiers used to be participating in the demonstration, and a lot of them were in Basil Davis' funeral. So when that action took place, it never surprised me. So I want to make a point on that, because I hear Richard Kelshaw and other people talking about that 1970. We put a stop. No. I am saying what Rex and Raf and Bazi, the action they took, prevented unnecessary bloodshed, because it would have ended up on the streets with also soldier versus police.
That was Clive Nunez, who was one of the leaders of the movement as the head of the Transport and Industrial Workers Union. The unions were heavily involved in Black Power, and he's describing his experience of being arrested on the 21st of April 1970.
Yes, and thank you for, if you're just joining us, you're listening to Independency right here on I-95.5 FM, and you can also find us on Independency on our Facebook page. Just go to Independency on the Facebook and click live, and you will get to see what's happening, because we are putting up pictures as the people are narrating, and also the commercials as well. You will see it live on Facebook, because we have commercials from the, or to say promos from the counter trafficking unit, especially, that you need to see and understand as they continue to educate the public on these issues. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. To those folks just joining us again, thank you very much. We're going to acknowledge you all when we return right here on Independency. Stay right there.
This is reality radio at its best. Independency on I-95.5 FM.
Ah boy, feel like I'm gonna buy myself a senorita tonight.
Nah. You know you might be promoting slavery.
Slavery? Mm-hmm. What are you talking about?
Hey, modern day slavery or human trafficking is just what some of these people just do. You know some of these women were tricked to come here? Some are held against their will, abused, and even beaten. Most times the girls don't even see any of the money that is paid for them. And every night, they just have to come out looking nice and sexy for somebody like you. Human trafficking is a serious problem and a serious crime. Persons who solicit commercial sex services may be contributing to human trafficking. A message from the Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security.
Hello. Hi, this is Pt10 from HMP London. Can I speak to Miss Sheila, please? This is Miss Sheila. Hi, I've got an important call for you. Please hold the line.
Mommy, it's Sherry.
Oh, God, Sherry, we looking for you all the time. 3 weeks now. Where you going?
Mommy, according to tell you, I get locked up. I had drugs in my luggage and I'm in England right now. In jail.
Oh, God, Sherry, what? What you do? How you reach there? Oh, God, how we gonna do?
Oh, God, Mommy, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. It'll be all right. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Eye on Dependency. Reality radio at its best every Sunday from 6:15 to 8 p.m. on I 95.5 FM. Don't miss it.
Eye on Dependency with Garth and Natasha, Trinidad and Tobago.
You're listening to Eye on Dependency with Garth and Natasha. Reality radio at its best.
They talk about power, doctor, it's you who have power. I know when you act, it would have been a horse of a different color. You give them an inch, they take a whole yard, and when you had them under your clinch, people say you're bad. Well, when I heard you address the nation, I knew what was your intention, but some of the powers you exercise, unfortunately, I must criticize. We didn't want them trigger-happy police, we only wanted to demonstrate in peace, yet my people was held and charged for sedition. We was marching for equality, black unity, and black dignity. Dr. William, no, we didn't want no revolution. You must be aware that the black consciousness is here. I further declare, it's time that we get an equal share. It's black blood, black sweat, and black tears, but it's white profits, cause all through the years, it's the white man who reaping the benefits. But now we are coming down from the shelves, and we are getting to know ourselves. So let us hail God the stranger for bringing all black people together. Because the fight was against racial prejudice, the imperialists, the capitalists, yet some ignorant people they talk about communism. They didn't want all the setup burning down, and the smashing of all them stores in town. Dr. William, no, we didn't want no revolution.
All right, thank you for staying with us, and good evening to Ronald, to Beverly from Brooklyn, Anne-Marie from New York, Valerie, Gil, and we have a very special guest, Heidi Nunez Gelino. No, good evening, she says. This is Heidi Nunez, the last child of Clive Nunez, the one that was born on March 12th, that Clive just mentioned. Okay, right. Thank you very much for joining us, sister. Anne-Marie, nice, Mario, thank you from Toronto. Charlene. Right, thank you for joining us. Kenneth is watching as well. Kenneth, good evening. Gail Nunez, Black Share. All three of Clive Nunez's daughters are listening. Thank you very much.
Good stuff.
Good evening, Batch, Duki, Benton. All right, let's get going. Now we're gonna hear from Khafra Kambon. He's gonna tell us now about his experience, what happened with him, and he's going to give us a history again. Yeah. And we thank you all for thanking us for the history lesson, but we have to thank these gentlemen because we're learning to what happened back then. All right?
So we're going to start with Brother Kambon talking about how the movement started through his involvement in NJAC. And so we're going to get a sense of what the mood of the country was like, what was happening, and some of the emotion and turmoil that the country was experiencing before the state of emergency was called.
And also good evening to the second child of Clive Nunez, Michelle Nunez. Whole Nunez clan locked on this evening. Harold Bola and Supernumerary, good evening to you. And let's go straight now to Khafra, Kambon.
Unfortunately, I must criticize. We didn't want...
Khafra, Kambon. At that time, I was known as Dave Dabo. I was at the University of the West Indies up until February and May of 1969. The National Joint Action Committee, which is the organization that led the Black Power movement, was formed on campus on February 26, 1969. That is the date that you would see as the beginning of the Black Power movement. Movement don't begin on a date as such, but the organization that was to lead it was not born as an organization to shake up Trinidad and Tobago, let's say. It was really a matter of mobilizing national support for a number of Caribbean students who had been imprisoned in Canada, charged for burning down the computer center at what was then called the Sir George Williams University when they were protesting against racism. And we had called together a number of organizations to rally behind the cause of the students, and an indication of the mood in the country at the time. Also, an indication of the activism of the students at that time is that you had attendance from trade unions, you had attendance from a number of grassroots organizations that were developing, especially in the urban grassroots areas, strongly influenced by the cry of Black Power. So you had this mixture of students and community activists and trade unions and so that came together to form an organization that was going to fight the issue, mobilize public opinion here on that issue in Canada. So that is how it was formed. But of course, the people came together. I mean, when you're talking about the trade unions at that time, were people who had deep social concerns. They were not your normal reactionary trade union only fighting the straight wage issues. So people who were looking at change in the society. And then you had these organizations that were inspired by Black Power. They were holding public meetings and mobilizing in their areas. Many of us at the time in the Caribbean, and this is an important point, you had a movement towards independent thought. There was a group called New World Group. Roy Best was a key figure, and he was a lecturer at the university in Trinidad and Tobago at the time. He was a key figure in that New World Group. Gervin was also a key figure. What you basically had was a group of lecturers and academics who were very committed to the idea of development of independent thought so that we can analyze our region, not based on fixed formulae which you learn in school, but now that we begin to see what are the proper categories of analysis for our own society and things of that kind. So you had that mood of independent thought, and you had that stimulation of that term Black Power, connected with such force at different levels, tells you it meant something to us in terms of the way we experienced our social reality. And that is where the persons who formed the National Joint Action Committee, in an environment of commitment to independent thought, began to shape a whole ideology of change that was labeled Black Power. But really not a copy of the United States situation. It's totally different to what our situation was.
So 1970 rolls around. Could you give us a sense of what was happening up and until the state of emergency was called on the 21st of April?
1970 itself built on a number of developments in 1969 because the type of organization that NJAC was, well, it got students involved in trade union issues. And one of the things that was building up to 1970 had to do with what was happening in the trade union movement. You had a big bus strike in 1969, and coming into 1970, the students were going on trial. That's in Canada. So we're looking at something external to the society again, and a kind of continuation. Students were going on trial on February 26, 1970, in Canada for arson and all kinds of criminal charges. So the university students decided to protest. And it wasn't a massive protest. There was no mass mobilization for it. But you find that a few representatives of trade unions were there. 3 particular trade unions, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, the Transport and Industrial Workers Union, and you also had National Union of Food, Beverages and Allied Workers under a man called Francis Edo. That union collapsed a few years later. So you had unions, students, the bus workers, and everything on February 26, 1970. But they were just token representation. The grassroots groups, the unions, 1 or 2 people came out just to show solidarity. So you probably had about 200, a little more than 200 students, and you must have had 15, 20 people who were not students. It is the events of that day that changed the dynamic. We went to the Royal Bank of Canada, and we went there because this was an all-Canadian-owned financial institution, and our thing was to put the institutions that belong to Canada under notice. So we took our protest to the bank. Clive Nunez, who had money in the bank at the time, went in the bank to demand withdrawal of whatever money he had there as part of the protest. Other members of the demonstration went in as well, all very peaceful, but the bank called the police. Well, the police were there from the start anyhow because it was a demonstration. And the police came in. I believe additional police would have been called, perhaps. But they came in and they started to really rough up people, most of whom were students, and treat them badly and to throw them out of the bank. So people were being beaten and dragged out and shoved out. And it was pretty rough, unnecessarily rough. And maybe it had to do with the colonial psychology and what a bank represented. A bank worker then didn't look like you or I, except for the doorman, because this was a period when Trinidad was a very apartheid society. There were some jobs that white people or very light-skinned people could get, and people like us, no matter what the qualifications were, could not get those jobs. That created an aggravation, which led people to move from outside of the bank now, cross the road, to a store that was owned by the brother of the then Minister of Home Affairs, it was called, the equivalent of National Security, was a Montano. The demonstration walked through the store, still a very small demonstration of 200 and something people, but walked right through the store. Nobody picked up anything, wasn't a steal, was a way of sending a notice, and then headed up along Independence Square north and headed eastwards. The Catholic Church had come out totally denouncing the students. They're not waiting on no court. They were calling for vicious punishments of these black students who dared come into Canada. And there were a number of Caribbean students that were on trial. And the day that they are going on trial, you have the Catholic Church denouncing and calling for blood. It is the Catholic Church in Canada that was denouncing the students. So we really went in the church just to send a quiet message that we don't like what the sister organization in Canada is doing and the stand that they have taken. And it was a very peaceful demonstration that went into the church. Some people went up onto the pulpit area and so on, and whoever was the priest in the church at the time, I can't remember his name, but he came out. And that time, everybody was either white, near white, or something who had hierarchy in the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church itself reflected the racism that you had in Trinidad and Tobago at the time in terms of its hierarchy. And there was some discussion between the priest who had come out and those who were part of us who had gone up onto the altar area. Just quiet, cool discussions, and I believe Dagger spoke to the people who had come into the church. And when we left after a peaceful demonstration, nobody disrupted anything. The only thing, somebody put a flag over St. Peter or somebody said, put a black flag. And that was like, God, all these white images, Remember, everything in society was structured in a way to show white superiority and black inferiority. Icons in the church reflected that same thing, All part of the mind domination, make you worship white. And when you put that on top of enslavement in particular, and then they shipped to a lesser extent and all that. Everything in society, all the symbols, everything was geared toward that sense of white superiority and the opposite, black inferiority. So that is why that irritation of that, because remember we are talking the language of black power now, and people are therefore very influenced, the sense of pride in self, wanting to see what is sacred to them represented the way they look and all of that. And therefore, the dominant white images become offensive when somebody takes the initiative and covers that. But when the news about the demonstration in the church hit, a lot of people just came from everywhere. So two things were happening. After this demonstration went into the Montano store, a lot of other stores, as the word spread, started to let go their employees. And many of them were coming in that direction because they were going towards the bus terminals to get their buses to go home, their taxis. And as the news hit the radio, they were joined by a number of people coming from surrounding communities like Laventille, East Rye River, and so coming out to see what was going on and to become part of this. So by the time we moved from the church to Woodford Square to hold one of the first Black Power movement in Woodford Square, you find that you were talking about thousands of people. So that was the first big public meeting for 1970. From there, it escalated because first you get this very large meeting, and we are not just talking about the students in Canada. That's the core issue that has brought us together. But looking at the Trinidad and Tobago society and the racism that was embedded in the society and even reflected in the church. You know, there are things that another generation would not know because they grew up taking some things for granted. But you take the churches, the Anglican and the Catholic Church. Before the Black Power movement, you could not have steel pan in church. That was saying, in other words, that something was wrong with our national instrument. It did not reach a level of sacredness. It could not be used for a sacred purpose. I grew up in a society where, and it is church influence again, if on Ash Wednesday, you know, Calypso being drummed into my head for the past 2 months or so with the carnival season, but if my tongue slipped to sing the words of a Calypso, then my mother would threaten to wash out my mouth with soap water because Calypso in Lent was a sin. So steel band was something of the devil, I would suppose, so it could not be played in church. So the Black Power movement had a lot to do with challenging the oppressive psyche of the society. You're challenging institutions and structures, but you're also challenging the psyche of the society, which was critical. And I believe it is that challenge to the psyche that made it the powerful force that it was. Because now you're not just telling people about their belly, you're also telling them about the way their minds were worked on and the extent to which our minds were part of our oppression. And one of the tools in the hands of our oppressors that would make us comply. It tells you that we were dominated in ways that were not so visible, and we did not have the eyes to see because we grew into that kind of domination. So that is what started this happening, and the reaction of the state afterwards caused a further escalation.
They talk about power, doctor, it's you who have power. I know when you act, it would have been a horse of a...
So that was Khafra Kambon.
First part.
We still have another clip to play from him. He really shared a lot of information with us, and we apologize in advance that we could not share all of it with you. He really gave us an in-depth interview. But these are the most salient things that we felt we needed to share with you to give you some context, because earlier on in the series, you know, we heard people ask, why was this happening? You know, what was the motivation behind it? And we thought that what Khafra Kambon said gives us that context and gives us that background upon which we can analyze all of that we've heard for the last 9 episodes.
Yes, and of course, again, good evening to Gail, Michelle, and Heidi Nunez, the Nunez family. Thank you all for joining us. Lyndon Wilberg. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Our Independency right here on I-95.5 FM and live on our Facebook page, Our Independency. So, Sophia Weeks, Godfrey Lewis, Alva, of course, Mario.
And all 3 of the Nunez daughters.
Yes, Gloria.
We understand
Dan.
all of you are listening.
Yes, thank you all very much. We're glad to share this information to Edith. Thank you very much for joining us. Right, so let's go back now and let's finish off with Khafra as he, continues his taking us through this journey. 1970, Black Power Revolution. Khafra.
Because the fight was against racial prejudice, the imperialists, the capitalists.
this thing was building up, and the way that we knew that a state of the emergency was on the card, because we didn't feel that the government would think they could survive without some drastic action. They either had to come to some major compromise, or they had to take very drastic action of some kind, of which a state of emergency is a major tool. So we were kind of looking out for it, but you could never tell when it would come. And then the PNM General Council had a meeting on the 20th of April that year, 1970. And that was one of the hotly debated issues. I think a lot of people at the General Council were not in favor of the state of emergency. Of course, the government itself, I suppose, would have remained mum on it at the meeting, I don't know, because they would have had their plans by then, but naturally you couldn't disclose the plans, because I could tell you that a lot of the military did not know that that state of emergency was coming. I think it was kept at very high level. I went home that night because, we had so much planned for the next day. But I didn't always leave home, because we felt a state of emergency could come at any time. But whatever kept me in Port of Spain, I ended up going home. I used to live on Gordon Street, right by the jail. My house overlooking the jail. And I got this knock on the door, 4 o'clock in the morning. A number of people were there with me because April 21st was going to be a very big day. You had the sugar workers coming to march into Port of Spain. The National Joint Action Committee was involved in the sugar workers' strike. WASA workers were on strike. Clive, Nunez and myself were involved in that strike. In fact, we were guiding the workers in their negotiations, and the workers ran their union because they said the union is no use. The bus workers were going on strike again on that day, and a number of other places were going to strike on April 21st. It was a very frightening day. Any government would have been scared for what would happen on that day. My pickup was at 4 a.m. on April 21st, and with all that expectation, I knew one time, I say, you see this is state of emergency. The police wouldn't confirm it. Well, you would expect that they would not say state of emergency coming, even though I had no means of communicating with anybody again. But I was very surprised when I was taken down to Coast Guard headquarters, because I thought, okay, this is straight to police headquarters and from there to somewhere else to be locked up. But no, we went straight down to Coast Guard headquarters. And what makes me know how secretive this whole thing was is that when the car pulled up by Coast Guard headquarters, the driver got out and he whispered to the sentry and all of that. And then there was quite an alarm to call up. Somebody came in and they ran inside, and then you heard all these, whether it's rifles falling, man jumping off the bed, all kind of sounds you heard up inside the building. You come parked in a car in the compound, and people scramble on their uniforms and they come, and then some senior officer, I don't believe it was Blue, some other senior officer who spoke to the guys, and I couldn't hear a word, but you could tell the actions and everything, and everybody with their guns at the ready. I realized that except for very senior people at senior levels who needed to know in the military and so on, it had not been communicated that a state of emergency was declared. But I realized from my time I picked up that's what it was. And while I was down at Coast Guard headquarters, I was the first to arrive there. Afterwards, more and more people were being brought in, and we were held. I don't know what the structure of the building is now, but when you went upstairs, there was an open area, and we were held in that open area. We were just surrounded by people who had their guns, but I can't make any complaints about how we were treated by the Coast Guard at all. And then at some point, I heard a car racing out of Tetron, coming from that direction. I mean, it sounded like a car on a racetrack. It was a red sports car swung into the Coast Guard headquarters, and it was a guy I recognized as Julian Spencer, captain, I think he was at the time. So he came, and once he came, I said, you know what, something serious happened in the army, because I don't think Sterling Moss could have caught up with him on that day. He flew into that place and he jumped out, and naturally we don't hear the discussions that take place, but it was clear what was happening, so I was expecting to hear anything after that. I know that the police would not have had any trust in the army because soldiers used to openly identify with demonstrations. An army vehicle would pass a demonstration and soldiers would be given the power sign. The vehicle would slow down and soldiers in uniform, in other words, they're saying, we are with you. That is to tell you what the mood at the time was like. And also there were a few soldiers who, I think they would change from time to time, would come and carry flags as well. Of course, not in their army uniforms like those given the power sign. So there was a mood in the country. This thing touched people to their souls. It is something that you have to experience experience it to understand it, because it's not the kind of thing that comes about easily. And it is not like the fever of party politics. It is something of people who are discovering themselves who they are and feeling very deeply about it. So I suspect that the government was having serious doubts about its military by the time April 21st had come along, because Black Power was infectious.
So they took you out to Nelson Island, and how long did that last?
That lasted till close to the end of the emergency, I believe, but I only spent a few days there, because when Dara was held, and he was held perhaps a week after, because he was not home when they were making the raids. He was down in the south. He was like at the home of Winston Leonard, who was like the head man for a lot of the southern area. So Dagger and a couple others were at his home, because they were busy organizing, and that morning they were supposed to go meet the sugar workers. We were arrested because the movement was seen as a threat to the government. I don't think there were any specific charges then. We were detained as political, let's say political prison. It was political detention. What they call it, preventive detention. We didn't go into the prison on the basis of any charges, because a state of emergency was declared, so the government now has emergency powers, and that's why the emergency was declared. Because otherwise you'd have to hold people on specific charges. But the thing is that we could have challenged them, because most of the arrests, for I suppose the security reasons, took place before an emergency was declared.
They talk about power, doctor, it's you who have power.
There you have it. That was Khafra Kambon once again, and paying homage to his buddy, Clive Nunez. And you know, can you imagine Clive Nunez going in the bank and saying, "Oh, give me all the money, please. I want my money now." But they brought back some memories, some names, you know, like police officers like Wilson, Regis, Clive spoke about, Stanley Johnson, of course, he mentioned, Commodore Franklin and others.
And the world famous now, Julian Spencer.
Yes. World famous.
Everybody has mentioned him, huh?
Yes. Curtis Cox is saying, I was saying to myself, that voice sounds like Clive. And he's saying, Clive, there's a small movement. So Clive is a walking encyclopedia. I felt good hearing him speak at Eating Choices restaurant. We just heard from a legend. That's Curtis Cox. Thank you, Curtis, for your comment. Curtis Rodriguez comment. That's the first time I'm listening. I'm viewing from New York. Good history show. The stuff need to be documented. These men have great memory. Thank you, Curtis Commoner, listening out there in New York City. Hope you're safe out there, bro. Mario Gonzalez and Natasha, there is so much to tell. The nation needs to be re-educated as the real events and circumstances, keep the series ongoing. Keep the series ongoing, please. Mario. We are happy for this platform to educate and inform persons on history. Dave Dabro, or Khafra Kambon as he's now called, has been a part of my family's life. He's a true soldier. That's from Misha Nunez.
And Alison says, isn't it interesting, and this is a very pointed comment, isn't it interesting that black consciousness is again gripping world attention as this program unfolds?
Yes.
Now, this was not planned, but it does come at a very opportune time, not just for the events that are unfolding here in Trinidad and Tobago, but as you say, Alison, in the world.
Yes. So we thank these gentlemen for your service. Thank you very, very, very much. You made changes happen in Trinidad and Tobago, and you will always be remembered for that. We're going to take a quick break. Remember, we're showing our ads now on Facebook, so you can join us live on Independency's Facebook page, and we have very interesting PSAs from the counter trafficking unit. So make sure and look at that. If you have to sit with your child or children, let them see it as well. We'll be back.
Slavery, a terrible time in our history. The kidnapping, buying and selling of people for profit, the exploitation of another human being. It still exists today. It has a new name: human trafficking. Anyone can be a victim. There is forced labor, sexual exploitation, and domestic servitude. Human trafficking is a worldwide problem and an emerging concern for us here in Trinidad and Tobago. If you know of or suspect human trafficking activity, call the counter-trafficking hotline at 800-4CTU or 800-4288. Human trafficking is a crime. Identify it, report it, stop it. A message from the counter-trafficking unit of the Ministry of National Security.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Dobson here from HMP London. Can I speak to Mr. James, please?
This is Mr. James speaking.
Thank you. Can you hold the line? I have a call coming through to you, sir.
Sure.
Hello, Daddy.
Hello, yes, Brian?
Daddy, I'm just calling to tell you that I looked up in the UK for drug trafficking.
Oh, yeah? You lock up? And you tell me I was going to Tobago? And I tell you about them boy I was liming with? Well, alright. Don't drop the soap. Carry on.
Eye on Dependency. Reality radio at its best every Sunday from 6:15 to 8 p.m. on I-95.5 FM. Don't miss it. On I-95.5 FM. Don't miss it.
Hi, my name is Professor Cram Mackenzie from the Centre of Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Canada, and you're listening to Eye on Dependency with Garth and Natasha at I-95.5 FM, Trinidad and Tobago.
This is reality radio at its best. Eye on Dependency on I-95.5 FM.
With barefoot and Khafra, I had no voting rights. I woke for me master, I woke day and night. Big load upon me head, I thought that I was dead. But Captain Cipriani came to me and said, he tell me, Indians and Negroes unite. We have won the battle for humankind. Out of years and tribulation, we built our nation. Trinidad and Tobago is ours, black and white. Now the land is mine, the sea is mine, the hills beneath the sun that shine. I like me Indian festival and Indian dance. The valley time, Pagua time, Ida Peter is my name. Ramila time and Huse time is Bacchanal.
And to the voice of Prince Valiant, as you can see as well, we've connected the calypsos back then to the revolution, and this one calls for African and Indians to unite. Well, there is something still to happen in Trinidad and Tobago, but we started off with Power by Lord Fluke. If you're interested to know the tracks that you've been hearing, then No Revolution by Brother Valentino, and Out of Tears and Tribulation, this was Prince Valiant, and as I said, very powerful contributions for the movement back in the day.
Indeed.
Everybody was really on top of their game, consciously recording these events. So thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to Eye on Dependency, and you can also see us on Eye on Dependency's Facebook page. And you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do that, and we'll share it with the listening audience. Those of you listening to us on the radio, thank you very much too for tuning in. Now we go to Mr. Alfred Aguiton.
Mr. Alfred Aguiton, who is a former journalist, adman, advertising. He started Ample Advertising with a wealth of experience, obviously, in the media. So, and he is an excellent storyteller. And again, we could not use all of what he said to us, but we will share what we can with you this evening. So let's take a journey now through the eyes of Alfred Aguiton as he was covering the events of 1970.
We fought for freedom for many, many years.
1970, the context of the Petro encounter and the soldiers and sailors business would be that the Black Power thing was happening. And we were out there covering it and seeing very interesting things happening. It was quite a phenomenon to see coming alive in front of you. For a while, it seemed to be confined to a lot of healthy exuberance by young people, and it wasn't starting to really seriously threaten the government. There was mild disturbance of things like traffic and so on, but it was starting to catch fire. So that, for instance, the lead powerful speaker was Randall Dagger. They did a lot of gathering in Woodford Square, and he spoke from the same historic bandstand that Eric and they had made their mark from, but he was attracting quite a crowd. But as I say, it wasn't frightening until one day there was a demonstration. So they used to march through the streets of Port of Spain shouting power, power, power to the people. They would have stopped at one point one day outside what was then the Bank of London and Montreal. The short name was Bolam, located pretty close to the corner of Frederick Street and Independence Square. A demonstration was staged by the Black Power guys, Clive, Nunez, and the very efficient speakers right outside Bank of London, Montreal, making the point, look at this, a foreign bank controlling our affairs, how terrible it is, black people can't get work. And that led Eric Williams to decide that he would buy Bank of London and Montreal and establish the National Commercial Bank, NCB. So that was one of the very telling effects, very quickly made so, of the Black Power moving around the city and making them up. Then we'd see them coming up to Neil and Massey's location on Edward Street, closer to Park, when seeing the whites in Neil and Massey kind of hiding behind those expanding gates that this places had in those days. And the one guy who came out was the HR guy, Cyril Greenwich. He was black and he stood on the pavement, and we looked at it and shouted power to the people and then move on. But what happened on one day, there was a demonstration meeting in Woodford Square, and I think the police moved in to break it up. And one guy, Basil Davis, ran to get away from the policing, and somewhere just at the northwestern corner of Woodford Square, he encountered a police officer, and maybe he didn't obey orders to move or whatever it is, but the police were also frightened because they weren't trained, they'd never seen anything like this, they weren't well armed, and the police officer shot him and killed him. Well, that inflamed the movement. Now we have a martyr. And there was a massive funeral in Woodford Square with the body of Basil Davis lying and the casket on the bandstand. And so it had fantastic speeches being made and high fever emotion running around the place. Again, the police broke that up, and I remember going to cover it because 610 Radio was right there at Abercrombie Street. And I walked to the square, and we had shots being fired. But they were firing shots from those old 303 rifles up in the air, not at people. But we didn't wait for that, so we took off scampering. In those days, journalists around were like John Babb, he was there that day. Freddie Howard, my colleagues, he was there. Raoul Pantin was there. And maybe his brother, Dennis Pantin, he worked in the newsroom for a while there. So we all scampered back. So that started to increase the tempo and the tone of the thing. I had struck up a very useful relationship with Randy Burroughs. He was then assistant commissioner. Tony May was the commissioner, Trinidad white guy. Randy had an office downstairs, so I would walk across to police headquarters. I would flash my press pass, go inside, go across the courtyard, and go into Randy's office. But I witnessed a couple of times when the police would bring in demonstrators, and they would beat them in the courtyard. One particular incident took place. They said the police were shot at on Prince Street or somewhere at Batterstone. A fire had been started, and they felt it was the demonstrators that started the fire and were shooting at them. So they picked up a lot of them, men and women, and brought them in van load. And the police formed a line like a gauntlet and were beating the folks as they were taken out of the van. And I remember Randy grabbing a shotgun he had in the corner of his office where I was sitting with him. And he ran across and he joined in the beating and so on. So there was that kind of thing happening. But then there was the famous March to Caroni, and we covered that. The March to Caroni began with small numbers, and I think it was also a byproduct of the Basil Davis martyrdom thing. And they said they would march because they felt they were getting support from East Indians, and Africans and Indians Unite was on the front banner that they marched with. They left University in Woodford Square, and they moved off from Port of Spain and started to make their way. So we started to follow the march. Every now and then we'd get ahead of it in order to get our perspective, look at it, and then we get in between it. But a fantastic thing started to unfold. As we drove along the Eastern Main Road, we saw more and more people coming out from their homes, yards, and around a fence, and from the porch, the gallery, and so on, and joining in the march. And I started to see people, elderly, like women, and with baskets with things to eat in it. So they were seriously prepared to stay with the march. Okay, so we kept going there and covering it and doing reports on how the march was going. We got ahead of the marchers when they were starting to go through the Sangwon area. And I remember we parked in the Mount Hope area, and we were looking at the march, and the march came around. There's that slight drop drop as the road starts to go through Mount Lambert. And when I looked, I saw the size of the crowd, and they were moving at a good clip. So I was seeing how it was spreading and looking enormously large. They were now filling the width of the Eastern Main Road. No traffic was moving, and they were fairly deep. There were people from edge to edge of the main road, and then in a long stretch backward. So when the march came down towards Mount Lambert, the tail of the march was still in the Pt10 area. Police gave us numbers that would have been in the thousands. We did our own count. So in my report, I had mentioned two things. But the march had now gathered the strength in numbers of thousands, and I didn't know at the time that somebody had called Prime Minister's office to tell them that the government-owned station was covering this anti-government march and had been doing what the reporters may have thought was a great job. But it really politically was exciting people and encouraging them to join the march, and that was perceived to be a government disservice and so on, because we knew that the hot point was going to be the house of Badis Maharaj. He was the head of the union for the cane farmers. He was the Hindu leader of all East Indians. He was bigger than Sat Maharaj. And somebody had said that the Black Power March would not be allowed to passage through Karani. The East Indians there would come out of the cane fields and attack them, mutilate them and all sorts of things. Because the cry Black Power seemed to alienate East India, although there were a number of East Indians in Enjal. So there was this scare that Badis would trigger his henchmen, his shooters, cutlass wielders, if the march entered into the Karani area. So question was hanging over the thing, should we take the chance to try to walk through Karani Limited in order to do this gesture of joining with our East Indian brothers and sisters? Or that would be too dangerous and we shouldn't go and provoke people who could end up attacking us. They didn't know what Badis would do, and we figured that was a hot spot and touch point. So we raced ahead, and oh God, Badis' house was at the corner of the Eastern Main Road and Sagan Drive, facing the Eastern Main Road. So we swung up Sagan Drive, turned the car around to face the Eastern Main Road, to see the back of Badis' house, to be there to witness what would happen when the Black Power March reached to Badis' house. And there it was. High theatre drama. As the march got nearer to the house, we saw Badis leave the house and start walking towards his gate facing the march. We noticed that Badis had a pistol stuck in the back of his pants waist, and he had a number of his guys lying set back from the main road in the grass with rifles pointed at the Eastern Main Road. We didn't have a clue what the heck was going to happen now, and Badis walked very slowly towards the gate. The march by that time had reached to Badis' gate, the front line of the march. And one of the eeriest things you could ever experience, I think, was the march came to a stop and there was absolute silence stretching along the entire route of these thousands of people, going all the way from Khafra to Mount Dor, Mount Hope, Mount Lambert, all the way back to Pt10, and everybody stopped. Nobody said a word. I think time stood still. I think nature stood still. There was maybe a mild breeze just to add to the theatre. And as Badis reached the gate, he stuck his right hand up in the air with a folded fist and he shouted, "Power to the people." Well, the march went crazy. And they took off at such a clip, we had trouble catching up with them. Eventually, they went through Kirep, and of course the side story there was UWI students had come out to wait at Kirep Junction to join the march, support, but Archbishop Pantin was due to join the march at the Kirep Junction. And eventually he said, later on he explained that high members of the Catholic Church prevailed upon him, persuaded him, don't do it, it would send the wrong message and stay out ahead. And so he relented. But I remember interviewing him and he said he was in support. And of course, he was trying to show his graciousness, his mercy, forgiveness, generosity, because the Black Power guys had gone into the cathedral and desecrated a number of the statues in there. So he didn't join the march. We followed the march down the southern main road through Kirep. As it swung into Karani, now we're expecting anything. So we get ahead of the march and we're looking back. And we saw East Indian mothers, fathers coming out, some joining the march. But to me, infinitely more striking, importantly, was they had put out drums with water and they were handing out cups and different containers of water to the marchers. And I said, this is unbelievable. The kind of come together that was happening. So again, I filed reports on that. And these reports were being carried, and the government and PNM supporting was getting more incensed. So as we proceeded through Caroni with the march, our manager came on the radio and said to us, Alfred, you're going to shut down the coverage. We got a report, and Whitehall has complained that the reports are encouraging the responses and encouraging the march and stoking up people and so on. And what the program director, but he made the mistake perhaps, not being a Trinidadian, and he said to me, because he heard my reluctance and my pushback, and he said, you know, if you insist and you want to cover it, because he was sympathetic, they wanted the coverage, he liked it, but said if you have to, just reduce the numbers when you're describing the response. And I said, Leo, there is no way I can do that. I can't do that. This is serious journalistic integrity you're interfering with it. I didn't say that much, but point blank, no, I can't do that. I won't do that. He said, all right, you know what? Head to the substation that 610 had in the Chaguanas area, and I will meet you all there. So let the team drive on. Don't go with the march still. Head there, and I'll meet you all and explain off air what the position is. And said, okay, that's an order we could live with. So we dropped out of the march at that point. So I never witnessed them getting deep into Caroni and crossing the bridge and doing the other things that the print media were able to capture. Went to the substation, and he came and we chatted. He explained all the political stuff going on. That the chairman of NBS Radio 610, which was by then twinned with Pt10, to call it the National Broadcasting Service. Chairman was a fellow named George Lushington Bowen, Trinidadian Mexican fellow, who had been head of the public service, and he was very close with Eric, and Eric appointed him. But he came to the station and he spoke with the manager, Peter Pitts, and he explained the pressure that they were under politically. If we could tone it down a little bit, so okay, it was moving the powers that be to that extent. We were employees and we could only push back so far. So that was the extent of the thing. That was the build-up.
Right, to the strains of the big band back in the day, that was Prince Valiant and Out of Tears and Tribulation. And you know, we hear these calypsos, and I call Spangalang, say, Spangalang, Indians and Negroes unite. Spangalang said one time, Prince Valiant. I said, okay, with your right hand in the air like a tower. Sprang say, Lord Fluke. I say, okay. Check Sean Randu on Facebook. He has a lot of these old gems on his Facebook, on YouTube. Check him out. And we want to congratulate him for, you know, I'm sure he and Sprang work on this, or probably worked on it on his own, by putting together. But he has a lot of gems there, old gems that you probably never heard before. And because Natasha never heard about, you know, power, and
a big tune.
Tears and Tribulations and all of that. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to Independency, and we are on our final legs, as you should say. Now we have another part of Alfred Aguiton to play, but next week, please God, at the wrap up with the soldiers and the people who contributed. Remember, we're going to be showing all of their pictures of them in their kit who contributed from episode 1 to this wonderful educational series. I must say we've learned a lot, and we're going to thank them very, very much for their service and of course their contribution to this series. And
so we will share part 2 of Mr. Aguiton's contribution, where he talks about covering the mutiny side of it. He actually went down to Tetron, engaged with Surrett and some others. So that's a very interesting story that we would like to wrap up the series with.
Yes, and also we'll hear from the illustrious Mr. Brizan, David Brizan.
Yes.
He spoke with us, and he has a nice contribution from him. Also, Lou Jones decided he's going to respond to Mr. Kenneth Luke and his family. And we encourage that too as well, because, as I said, you know, we want to present a balanced product. And we, along with us here too, we're going to speak to that as well. Right? So we're going to take a quick break, and
we'll come back with our final contribution from
Mr.
Jones P. Madeira. Stay right there.
Remember, we're showing you these ads on Facebook as well. So we want you to see this one about sex trafficking from the counter trafficking unit, sexual exploitation, and also the other promos, and we'll be back. Stay right there.
We fought for freedom for many, many years.
You're listening to Eye on Dependency with Garth and Natasha. Reality radio at its best.
Hola, my name is Elena. Well, hola, my name is Elena. Well, it's actually not my real name. You don't really care, do you? All you care about is once you pay your money to my boss that I look pretty, smell nice, smile for you, and let you have good time, enjoying yourself and doing to me whatever you want to do for the money you paid. What you don't see or know is that I don't get any part of the money you paid. My boss takes all of it. I am forced to work, taking as many clients as my boss tells me to. I am beaten, made to take drugs, and I cannot leave this kind of work on my own. I am a victim of human trafficking. Please, por favor, help me.
Hello. Hi, this is Pt10 from HMP London. Can I speak to Miss Sheila, please? This is Miss Sheila. Hi, I've got an important call for you. Please hold the line.
Mommy, it's Sherry.
Oh, God, Sherry, we looking for you all the time. 3 weeks now. Where you going?
Mommy, according to Talia, I get locked up. I had drugs in my luggage and I'm in England right now. In jail.
Oh, God, Sherry, what will you do? How you reach there? Oh, God, how we gonna do?
Oh, God, Mommy, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. It'll be all right. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Eye on Dependency. Reality radio at its best every Sunday from 6:15 to 8 p.m. on I 95.5 FM. Don't miss it.
With Garth and Natasha on I-95.5 FM, Trinidad and Tobago.
Eye on Dependency. Eye on Dependency, where every life is a biography. On the Eye, 95.5, the most influential name in radio.
Remember Basil Davison, Guy Haywood, Brother Valentine, Beverly Jones, Brian Jefferson, the others whose lives went down on the line. I wonder if these people gave their lives for a hopeless cause, and for their deaths, all those responsible people, the verdict is yours. But Trini have a funny way of forgetting. Their history to them like don't mean nothing. The history that went down here in the 1970s, as though it never was today in this century. But don't care how they try to tarnish these historic memories, I will always remember the roaring 70s.
That's right, the Roaring 70s by Brother Valentino. And the other Valentino was No Revolution. So Ursulia Carey, I hope you got the names. And now we're going to hear from Natasha.
Jones P. Madeira. Everybody knows who this gentleman is, but where he started out in radio, I think he was at Radio 610 with Aguiton, and he talks about his experience on that day, the 21st of April. It's all of his contribution is encapsulated in that one day, and he went through a lot, believe you me. So let's hear Mr. Madeira tell his story.
Thank you for your comment, Trevor R. Wallace Sr. We're going to keep sending your comments to the Facebook page. Join us, and we'll of course share it with you later on. So as Natasha said, let's hear from Mr. Jones P. Madeira.
70 revolution. But
talking about the morning of April 21st, 1970. It's a day that many people will remember, those of my age, as culminating weeks, months of demonstrations by young black people in our society, of course the predominant of the African and Indian population, that somehow felt that they were not getting their equal share in the pie that was Trinidad and Tobago. They saw it particularly in some of the, what you may call, prestige positions that people of fairer complexions held. And I think in particular that the banks were targeted, and a lot of anger was directed at the banks, to the extent that I think out of that emerged the discussion on National Bank and the growth of the Workers' Bank, and that morphed eventually into First Citizens and so on. But the fact is that youths were demonstrating across Trinidad and Tobago, and I saw the growth of it. Started off with a few, and then it swelled into hundreds, and then thousands. And I dare say tens of thousands if you can add 20,000 people on the streets of Trinidad and Tobago for some purpose outside of Carnival. Then politically or otherwise you're doing well. So that was how it was at that time, and I remember walking down Frederick Street and seeing a band that was depicting something but not a regular band. And my girlfriend pointed it out to me and she said, "Which band is this? Do you know about this band?" And I said, "No, that's not a band. It was in fact a demonstration." But some of the messages in there, and I detected that with Carnival, I think it was at the end of February or early March, that we would have seen an escalation of the taking over of the streets by the young people of the country. So it moved to the position where it became a major national security issue. Thousands of young people on the streets of the country, up and down the towns and villages, punching the air with their fists, defiant cries of black power as it was, and targeting quite a number of known institutions to really get the recognition of those who were not as interested at the particular time. So here I was on the morning when I didn't expect a state of emergency. I expected more demonstrations. In fact, I was caught driving down to Couva, where there was to have been a major demonstration of sugar workers. And when I got into the Couva area, I found it eerily quiet. I thought I would have seen hundreds of cane farmers or sugar workers on the streets, but I saw absolutely nothing. And I did not know what would have caused that. I wasn't aware that a state of emergency had been declared until I got a beep from the master control area of 610 Radio, where I was serving as current affairs producer and announcer. And they said to me, "You'd better head back up immediately because a state of emergency has been declared." And I was telling them, "I'm sorry, I didn't put on the radio in the vehicle, so let me start and please keep me alerted," because we had wireless transmission in the vehicle I was driving. And from the beep, which we usually put on the air to signal that we had a major story developing and you better listen, came the announcement that a state of emergency had been declared in Trinidad and Tobago. As far as I remember, I think it was maybe about 7:30 in the morning that we got the first broadcast. And I headed up, full gunning, up the road from the Couva and central area to Port of Spain, anticipating, of course, that I would be involved in whatever coverage was to follow that initial announcement. And the place was very quiet. I mean, it was not as if it was a day where you would have hundreds of thousands of vehicles on the road. But a state of emergency was declared. It looked as though people knew about it in advance and remain indoors for the most part. And by the time I got to Port of Spain, things were heating up among a few. I saw in the distance some smoke, and I said, "I wonder what's that?" I didn't investigate immediately. I had to get to the station quickly. And then, later in the morning, when the bacchanal, and I use the word bacchanal for all the noise and all the running and all the screaming began to emerge, I found myself hearing for the first time gunshot off the screen of the cinemas. This was reality. I mean, I looked from the third floor of the 610 building across to Woodford Square, and you could see people running down Abercrombie Street. And Jerome Ampersad, who was easily one of the finest persons you could work with in terms of news, he was my mentor and a good friend. He said, "Jones, got to be in here, you better get up and get out there." And I headed out to find that people were running all over the place. Police were running into the square from the St. Vincent Street headquarters, guns going off in the air, and one has to check on that as a form of discipline, if you will. Not pointing their weapons at the crowd that was now experiencing this for the first time in their lives, obviously, because you would have had the water riot the generation before, and that would have been a type of chaos that would be demonstrated in this new development that was taking place. So here I was running across to Woodford Square. A number of us just palmed out, knowing that we would have had to cover. Alfred Aguiton was one of the announcers who would do special events like myself. And we had Freddie Warwood, who was chief announcer. We had Jimmy Maynard, who was out in the newsroom. I had Tony Williams, brother of Prime Minister Eric Williams, who was our sports director. Desmond Ahi, who produced commercials for the station. So that we had quite a, in parenthesis, formidable group of people who were instantly transformed into a coverage group. And so we hit the various areas. I was in Woodford Square, and then as I was there, smoke started to billow from the eastern side of Woodford Square, and I decided to run towards the smoke. As I was running towards the smoke, it became thicker, and eventually I was lost in it, but I kept going. And as I emerged from that smoke, almost like a Boeing 747 coming out of a major cloud and encountering some turbulence, here I was, out of the smoke and into the fire, because ahead of me was a crowd coming towards me and police shooting up in the air. And I am saying that I just came from the direction where police were also shooting up in the air. There was confusion among the crowd. What do I do? So like the 747, I spun around, straight through the crowd. What was happening there was, I think it was the Batter Shoe store on Prince Street was being burned to the ground, and it was one of the first set of damage that I think that occurred on that morning. But it was quite intimidating to see police using the weapons into the air, and one hoped that they would not direct it at the crowd. I walked up to the Port of Spain General Hospital from Queen Street, and I remember going into a building that became a kind of reception area for the hospital, and I walked into that area and saw medical people engaged in tending to those who may have had slight injuries, because I saw nobody with any major injury. Except I saw a young man lying on, it may have been a couple tables, and he had a peculiar look on his face, one that looked as though it was somebody who was being surprised at something, somebody who was attempting to laugh and could not at the moment. So I went up and asked, "You okay? How are things? You saw anything happening here?" And there was no movement. I was actually talking to a corpse. So that was the first encounter with the serious reality that was being faced on that morning. And I ran out of the hospital, back onto Charlotte Street, and headed down to the station to see what kind of plan the station would have for us to do. And as we were getting there, Jerome, in his wisdom and understanding of these things, said that they've declared a state of emergency. Under normal circumstances, events of this time would draw a dusk dawn curfew, so let us be ready. And I said, nah, why would they enforce any conditions on the people at this time? It wasn't too long after that that they said on the radio by our own 610 that the state of emergency had been declared. That was a repeat. I think Carl Hodgson Phillips, who was the Attorney General, made the announcement. And they announced a curfew from dusk to dawn. So we kept waiting for more information. Information was coming like dribbling. So here was I, current affairs announcer, trying to impart as much information as we got them from the army and from people in authority, and not having a bit of experience of any sort with what one does in a curfew. How was I going to get home that evening? And then came information, you will have to use a pass. We are going to get a pass for you. Anybody who is supposed to be on the street must justify that proposition with a badge that identified you and that said what you were. So here I was. I waited for my pass while covering other things. Now, Tetron was a completely different kettle of fish because one has to remember that the soldiers were not visibly a part of the demonstration that were taking place in the country the preceding months and weeks before. Tetron just happened that morning. We got word from somebody who was on a boat traveling the North Coast and had radio as part of the equipment that they had on board. And we got wind from someone who received one of these wireless calls that said there was shooting in the army camp that they had just passed at Tetron. We should check it out. And when we did check, Tetron was under lockdown. A group of soldiers had in fact taken over Tetron, and the Coast Guard had put their boats out to sea. There was firing from the boats onto the hillside leading into Tetron. And they actually brought down the hill to prevent any traffic in and or out of Tetron. Then we were warned as part of the regulation that we had to be quite careful with the information we were putting out, and we had to cooperate with those people who were sending the information to us. Because all of these were covered under the state of emergency and the curfew and all that. And we had to really seek out the information to ensure that we were not in breach. What followed from that was, how do I get home? Or how do we get home if we should go home at all? Because we had a responsibility to discharge, and that was to provide as much information from the authorities via 610 and the other radio station, Exec Radio Trinidad, to enable people to understand what was happening and what they had to do to keep in line with the provision. I had a very funny experience with that one as well, because here I was, one of the key persons driving all around the place, bringing the information back, and I land back in 610 to do my final story. Leo De Leon, who is the program director, had gone up to police headquarters to get our passes, and he came back down and distributed the passes, and I got none. They forgot me completely. I thought I was worthy of being forgotten, but not in this instance. But I took it in stride. I said, well, what the hell do I do now? How do I get from Port of Spain to Arima? Jimmy Wong, who was one of the announcers, said he was going to go up, and why not let us form a two-vehicle convoy and head out to Arima, because we were both living in Arima. And I said, well, let's try, let's see. And I remember Frank Thompson, who was our chief engineer, was one of the persons who had gotten a pass. And they gave everybody their passes and said, JP, we don't know what to do about you. And I started to prepare to hunker down on the station and sleep until the following morning. But there wasn't an exit time for the curfew, so I don't know what I would have done. And I decided, well, if you have Frank Thompson's pass, why not give it to me and I will just flash it as I'm heading into Arima if anybody stops me. And they said, okay, well, if you want to try that, try it, but just be very careful. So Jimmy Wong, in his vehicle, ahead of me, heading up Abercrombie Street, and we turned and got on to St. Vincent Street and headed down towards Broadway. And there in the middle of the road, what I didn't want to happen was about to happen. There was a police roadblock. And I did not have anybody's pass except Frank Thompson's own to flash. And I said, okay, I would flash it because I didn't expect the police service would have been that diligent not to allow me to pass. And when I flashed the pass, the police officer said, no, let me see that. There was Frank Thompson's name on it. And I thought I was about to get the first lockup I would ever experience in life. So he said to me, hello, Mr. Thompson. I said, man, how are you doing? You fellas have a lot of work to do tonight and tomorrow night. I don't know when all of this will end. And Mr. Thompson, don't worry, we will get by. Jones, have a safe journey up the road. I said, okay, man, thanks a lot, but you calling me Jones? He said, yes, because you could never be Frank Thompson. When I looked closely, it was one of my schoolmates who had joined the police service. So if I had to get a jail that night, I would have gotten it. But thankfully, It was nice to work on his thing, and I headed out. Got into Arima and hunkered down for the night until the following day and weeks ahead. And that was April 21st.
And that was the illustrious, poetic, very descriptive Jones P. Madeira. Check this out, Natasha. Imagine, he says, going through the crowd, going through the smoke, emerging from the smoke like a Boeing jet. And as he cleared the smoke, there's this crowd coming after him. He had to beat a hasty retreat.
Out of the smoke and into the fire.
Yes, and of course he brought back some really nice names, some really famous names back then.
Yes.
People who actually created radio back then for Trinidad and Tobago. Jimmy Wong, Warwood, Tony Williams, Desmond Aye, Frank Thompson. And so much more. These gentlemen, and they had no Wi-Fi and cell phone back then.
Correct.
They did
These are the journalists that really had to paint a picture with, with their words, and they understood what it meant to cover a story, to really cover it, and as you can hear, they were immersed in what they were covering and really gave us a good sense of what was happening.
So let's go straight to the pictures, short man. We're not going to take a break now. We just go straight to the pictures, and we have some pictures to show you of the march to Caroni. Of course, the gentleman who you heard from this evening, that funeral for Basil Davis, the crowd that was there, and of course Badis Maraj. You know, these are people that our history will always record. So, short man, we go straight to the pictures. And of course, we have your comment. Bianca said, God, Natasha, you have brought out so much emotion in these events. I'm very grateful. The sound effects really helped to put the listener at the scene of the events. So there's the first banner up. That was the banner, Indians and Africans Unite. And I tell you, it generated a serious discussion on our Facebook page. When we put it up. Wow, it really brought out a lot of emotion from people, bringing back old emotions of. Let's go to the next picture, short man, the March to Caroni. And of course, if you're just tuning in, you can tune in on your device as well to Independency's Facebook page, and you will see the pictures that we are describing here. And up on the screen next, you'll see that March to Caroni, and you'll see how many people in that march. Now, Gail Nunez said something, and bringing back old emotions, being without my father and getting to see him when he went to the hospital because he had to get his eyes tested for glasses. Children couldn't go to visit in the jail. So my mother, Annette Nunez, took us to see him surrounded by police with machine guns at the hospital. The memories are causing me to cry. Wow. Well, we didn't plan that, sister, but, so that's the march. And the next picture will be that of
Clive Nunez.
No, the one on the screen right now.
Oh.
That's
Badis Mirage, yes. Because we've seen these already. So
all right, so you went to Badis. Yeah, okay, good move, fine. Short man. Yeah.
This is the Badis Mirage that you heard mentioned by our presenters this evening. He was the head of the Sugarcane Workers Union and also the founder of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha.
Yes, who Aguiton described as coming out with the pistol stuck in his waist and said, "Power to the people." Yes. I want to thank my father, Clive Nunez, and all the members of the 19th century movement for their fight for the betterment and opportunities that I have today. I would love to see the younger generation get in touch with the starters of this movement on guidance to make things better in our sweet country. That's that comment from Heidi Nunez Jelena. Of course, we have a picture now of Woodford Square. Will come up on your screen in a while, but this is on your device still. And this is
a meeting at Woodford Square.
A meeting at Woodford. See how Woodford Square looked back in the day.
Clean, eh?
Yeah. Trevor R. Wallace Sr. said, this program reminds me of those days in 1970. Actually, I joined the march somewhere before the cathedral out of curiosity. But when we got to the church, some of the demonstrators seemed to get carried away. They went on the altar and even started covering the statues of the Catholic saints. This so upset me, though I attended meetings in the square. I never had any further involvement in the marching. Right, so this is the funeral a picture of the funeral of Basil Davis.
I think this is when they would have been heading from
Yes.
Woodford Square to
Yes. Now, what's the
Samoa.
size of that crowd? My
Yeah.
God. That is a crowd.
Indeed.
Yeah. And they were really, I would say people long ago were a little more conscious than now. Would you think so? Would you say that? A lot more conscious than now, eh?
A lot.
Yeah.
Even though, I think the movement itself had raised our consciousness, as Kambon said, and brought change to many things that those of us who were not born yet, I am among them, came to accept and to understand that it was as a result of these young people's fight and determination that we are allowed to enjoy the things that we enjoy today.
Right, short man. So you could after this picture, you could show Nunez, Kambon, and Aguiton and Madeira again as we wrap up. Good night. Joining late, but Sandra Watson said I was 10 years old and attending Tranquility and living Mova. I was so afraid that day at school. I recall my mom and I were passing by Batter store when they started looting it. We had to run as fast as we could. Thank God we got a taxi on George Street to get out of Port of Spain. Good evening to Bernice Carr, Judith Beckles, Loma Warner. Good evening to you all.
And if you were paying attention, several speakers, Aguiton and Nunez in particular, and Kambon also mentioned, and Mr. Madeira, spoke about the police and the kind of relationship that the police had with the demonstrators. Have you all seen any similarities with what is happening today?
Right.
Aguiton spoke of witnessing police beating civilians in police headquarters.
Yes,
Persons
Safia.
that they had arrested during the demonstrations. So,
Safia Week said the amount of families this event affected, and that was part of saying saving lives. Salute to you all, unknown, unnamed. Thank you, Loma, for joining us. Crucita Rilovel said, good evening, Garton. Good evening, Linda Paulat Lake. I'm living through this history because of our independence. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing the words of the freedom fighters. Keep blessed to you.
And we apologize to our listeners on I-95.5 that we cannot take your calls, but we are desperately out of time.
Yes, and we have
2 minutes. I don't know if you want a chance at girl.
Just take one. Let's take one. Let's take one call
Let's
quickly.
take one
Clive
call.
Weatherhead, well done, again, Garton Natasha. Thank you, Mr. Weatherhead. Alison Landy with Basil Davis, then the George Floyd of today. Probably, you never know. Good evening.
Hello, God.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You know, we had a concept when I was a little boy in our core movement about consciousness. Consciousness embrace how we as black people treat one another.
Yep.
How we embrace other people. Consciousness actually was an ethnic neutral concept. I remember there was a fellow named Kamase something who used to run nationwide, a Chinese fellow who was a member of the NCHAC. So consciousness was a concept of building a community. And it embraced people of all ethnicities in a way of trying to see. Let us try to find a way to build a new society with justice, but especially among people of African origin, consciousness deeply tries to represent the idea of treating with each other according to our value system. And the elders at that time used to reprimand you and put you down and belittle you for doing things in an improper way. I would like to see us come back to consciousness. That
Thank you.
kind of concern, that kind of respect, that kind of attempt to build a community, that kind of attempt to make purchasing decisions that respect the community you come from,
Yep.
and also give value for whatever you're doing. That's one of the things we have lost from 1970 that I would love to see a rebirth of.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
We take one more and we wrap up. Good evening.
Good evening, God and Natasha.
Manu.
Good evening.
When you talk about the Black Power business in front of my borders there, I was right there at the time, you know. Them days, anything taking place with the young fellas from, we were in Mount Lambert. And that was an action point of the Black Power business, eh?
Okay.
When he was living in Mount Lambert, and then I think his dad was neighbor. He was in Mount Lambert and all them kind of time, so the action was in Mount Lambert here. When they passed the goat, like they going carry we young fellas going up the road, and brothers come outside with the gun in hand. People say in waist, but in hand. And then little time everybody stop. Then he say, pause to the people and turn and walk back inside in a kind of back way, walking back inside.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Next to that, he burned down 2 pointy motor cars in the yard.
Oh God! All right, Manu, we gotta go. We off the air now. Thanks. We gone. All right,
you.
Kenneth. We could wrap up with some comments. The symbol of the raised fist has been one we find it necessary to raise again today against socio-economic oppression that continues. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Kenny said, great series. So happy to know what went on behind the scenes, and I'm able to relive, to relate to some of the marches. And agree with that caller. Okay, well, folks, thank you very much, Sophia. Oh, God. All right, thank you for remembering Andrea, Jacob, Beverly Jones, Guy Haywood, etc. Yes, we'll remember them, and we will have their comments for you. Thank you, Sandra, once again, and all of you for joining us. God bless you all. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful journey, and we're gonna wrap up next week, Sunday, please God, with a nice parade of everyone who contributed, and of course comments from one or two other people that we have put together to close off the series. But this was wonderful indeed. Garth and Tasha, you both wore the uniform, so no question that when you passed the flag draped on your casket was earned. It's wrong.
I haven't worn the uniform, sir.
But I did.
But God did, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, we gotta go because we have the Anglican Hour up next. So join us once again for another interesting edition for Independence. Gloria, best. Thank you very much, and best regards to you and the family. All right, cool. Short man. God bless you all. Take care, folks.
Good night.
Next week Sunday, God's willing. Bye bye.
As though it never was a day in this century.
Eye on Dependency, where every life is a biography. On the Eye, 95.5, the most influential name in radio.
The most influential name in radio. I-95.